My name is Alfred Tarazi. I'm a visual artist based in Beirut, and you are now in my studio in Beirut City. In my work, I mostly investigate history. I am mainly interested in how historical events have shaped the past, the influence that these events have over the present, and of course, the future. History holds the key to understand past events. But when I, as a visual artist, talk about history, I am mainly talking about images, and I'm mostly interested in the role that images play in the making and unmaking of history. In my practice, I collect images. And when I get an image, there are two key questions I ask myself. Why was this image made, and how? I am currently working on a project about two revolutions that have changed the world in the 1970s, the liberation of women and the Palestinian Revolution. For this effect, I have built an archive of thousands of books, magazines, newspapers. I archive them, I digitize them, after which I build artworks. From the archive, I then make work such as these. These works are the ancestors of cinema. They literally move. To make these works, I rescue thousands of images, all digitized, and then overlaid to construct one narrative, one story that has been forgotten and that I, as an artist, come back to bring to light. I'm looking forward to the workshop Viral Images, wherein we will explore the relationship images have with history and the other way around. I leave you thus with a panoramic view of the city of Beirut. See you soon. Welcome to Viral Images. It's a workshop that we will be giving over 10 days, and it's a workshop about how to make images, how to think images, and so my name is Alfred Tarazi. I'm a visual artist based in Beirut. I will be giving the class with my partner Kamal Hakim. I work from images. I recycle a lot of images in the work that I do. And the difference between Kamal and I is that Kamal works images from scratch. He draws beautifully. And one of the points that I want to stress on in this course is the importance of observation. So, okay. Okay, so let us begin. Okay. We are living extraordinary times. Never before has humanity been so interconnected, our lives so global, our dreams and aspirations so high. These are the revolutionary times of the fourth industrial revolution, powered by artificial intelligence, automation, and the internet. A glimpse of this revolution is my very presence now, wherein you see my image and hear my voice instantaneously from wherever you are in the world. With digital networks, satellites, and drones, we are today in total visual control of the Earth's surface in real time. Never before has humanity been able to translate tangible reality into images at this speed, creating a perception of the world that is both marvelous and frightening. These are also terrible times, witness to the excesses of capitalism, wars, pollution, decimation of the Earth's resources, climate change, and a pandemic that has radically changed life as we knew it. The virus also spreads at a speed we are unable to control. However, none of this is new. The history of humanity has been shaped by technological revolutions connecting remote areas of the globe and viruses spreading uncontrollably. I think I should mute them. Welcome to Viral Images, a workshop about viruses, these microscopic parasites that hold the power of death over life. Welcome to Viral Images, a workshop about images, how we make them, why we make them, and how this has evolved throughout history. What history? What is the time bracket considered? Can one truly address a comprehensive history of humanity? Forget history. Think of this as a story, an illustrated fable about images and viruses. Let us begin the story with the random print of the palm of the hand of a child anywhere in the world. Chances are you have produced sometime in the past such an image. Chances are this image has been saved in a box of memorabilia, manifesting your very presence and growth. This image is not an icon. It is not a symbol. It is an index. It is based on causality, for it has been made in the presence of what it represents. 30,000 years ago, men have produced that very image. You find it in caves all across the world, in the caves that primitive men inhabited, seeking shelter from the elements. Next to these hands, elaborate depictions of animals, the very animals that primitive men depended on to survive. What humans were expressing in these representations was their relationship, their very dependence on these animals. Through these images, there was a magical transfer of power, embedding the act of killing in a ritual of survival. The hand, the index, is at once the signature, the trace of the culprit who will commit slaughter, but also the trace of the hand of the creator who turned a three-dimensional beast into a two-dimensional drawing. It is the magic of creation embedded into an act of destruction. These drawings that have survived tens of thousands of years depict rituals of sacrifice and survival that exist to this very day. They are, above all, a manifestation of our dependence on nature, our intrinsic link to a natural world that we have spent thousands of years trying to survive, understand, exploit, and dominate. A natural world that, with a single microscopic particle, a virus, can put all our ambitions on hold. In that delicate balance between man and nature, images have been our invaluable tool to translate the visible and the invisible, the tangible and the intangible, into knowledge. And at the base of making images, of writing, of producing knowledge, is the act of writing. Around the world, to this day, whenever artists practice the art of turning three-dimensional subjects into two-dimensional drawings, amazed groups of onlookers form around them to witness the magic of this act. Despite all our sophistication, our technological advancement, this act of drawing remains magical. This takes us to the Greek definition of the word image, to copy. But drawings, making images, has been much more than a simple act of copying. It has been an invaluable tool of thinking, communication, investigation, and discovery. Now, at this point, since we are about to start speaking in images about images, I have a question to ask you. Are you visually literate? You all speak languages. You've all learned alphabets, thanks to which you form words, words leading to sentences, sentences potentially leading to the most complex of ideas. Images are, however, the oldest language ever used. And to make images today requires you to learn an alphabet, to become visually literate. Images, contrary to text-based alphabets, are universal. Their history is universal. To learn the history of images is to learn that universal alphabet. On the 7th of March, 2013, a woman visited a branch of the Louvre in Lens, France. There, she scribbled enigmatic letters on the star of the show, Eugène Delacroix's Liberty Leading the People. This painting commemorates a popular uprising in France in 1830, and was first presented to the public in 1831. With a black marker, the woman wrote onto the painting AE 911. She was then arrested, prosecuted, and jailed. AE 911 is an acronym for a movement called Architects and Engineers for 9/11, a supposed group of professionals who put into question the official narrative of the tragedy that took place in New York on the 11th of September 2001. Essentially, they believe that the fire caused by the planes crashing into the towers could not cause sufficient structural damage for these towers to collapse. These people are known as conspiracy theorists and are generally discredited. In September 2001, a few days after the tragedy of 9/11, I boarded a plane and went to visit China. Aboard the plane, I was struck by a newspaper, and most specifically by the script that newspaper used. As a collector of images, I saved it, knowing one day it will be of use. When I came to write the word viral, the idea sprung to use these letters from that alphabet I could not decipher. Here is a language infected by another, a glitch, a mistake. An error. In China, I was mesmerized by the heritage of communist propaganda. Images one could find in thrift shops, discarded, used, obsolete. China was now evolving at an unmatched pace towards another future. There, you could also see the weight of tradition, thousands of years of traditions passed on through the centuries. In Xi'an, a tour guide showed me the oldest village in the world. I believed that village to be in Lebanon, in the town of Jbeil. For the Chinese, it is in Xi'an, next to the 8,000 life-size terracotta soldiers buried around Qin Shi Huang, their first emperor who ruled in 210 BC. These soldiers, each sculpted with a different facial feature, were all placed there to protect the emperor in his afterlife. Next to this phenomenal display of the power of art, modest ruins, the remains of walls erected in stone, the oldest village in the world, where thousands of years ago, civilization is said to have begun in China. Cities. There are many contenders in the world for the cradle of civilization. All these cities, however, emerged once man learned how to domesticate nature, how to build shelters, how to grow food, how to breed cattle. From these activities grew the practical need for accounting. Some of the oldest written traces by man has been found in Mesopotamia on gridded clay tablets. On these tablets were pictograms used to count the amounts of good involved in transactions. There isn't much difference between the Excel sheets of today and these clay tablets. At the root of writing, in the move from oral culture to the written world, was the need for accounting. And before words, alphabets, or letters, pictograms depicting the natural world were drawn. Now, the oldest written tale to have survived the passage of time was also found on similar clay tablets, a story that is still familiar and relevant to all. The story of the flood in the Epic of Gilgamesh, written more than 5,000 years ago. How puzzling is it that our first tale of civilization entails its very destruction 5,000 years ago? How curious is it that 5,000 years ago, the presence of man was already perceived so irksome to the gods that it deserved punishment? This is an excerpt from the chapter of the flood in the Epic of Gilgamesh. Enlil, the god of wind, air, earth, and storms, said to the gods in council, "The uproar of mankind is intolerable, and sleep is no longer possible by reason of the Babel." So the gods agreed to exterminate mankind. But another god sent a warning. "O man of Shurupak, son of Ubaratutu, tear down your house and build a boat." We are all familiar with the tale of that boat. 1,000 years later, another tale appears intertwined in these clay tablets and the book of Genesis, the Tower of Babel. 4,000 years before the collapse of the Twin Towers in New York City, history's very first tower was demolished by divine intervention. At the root of the tale of this fabulous edifice, a technological innovation, bricks, and a cautionary warning towards the power of another innovation, language. This is an excerpt from the book of Genesis. Now, the whole world had one language and a common speech. As people moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. They said to each other, "Come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly." They used brick instead of stone and tar for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth." But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower the people were building. The Lord said, "If, as one people speaking the same language, they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language, so they will not understand each other." So the Lord scattered them from there over all the earth, and they stopped building the city. Languages did indeed proliferate. To this day, there are more than 7,000 languages spoken throughout the world. But even though oral traditions have endured centuries and have managed to transmit science and art across civilizations, the most vital invention of humanity has been writing. In the beginning, says the Bible, was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. In the beginning, counters the filmmaker Peter Greenaway, was the image. Indeed, all words, all languages have begun as images, pictograms, and symbols. From the writing of the Mayas in South America, to cuneiforms in Mesopotamia, to Chinese characters, to the hieroglyphs of Egypt, the common denominator has been to draw shapes representing the world around them, emojis of the ancient world. The major leap forward came 5,000 years ago in the jump from a pictogram to a sound, using the image for the sound it makes, not what it represents. Hieroglyphs in Egypt developed as a complex writing form involving more than 800 characters. The technique of using sound, the sound of the hieroglyph, to form another meaning known as rebus is still used to this day in Chinese, which contains over 50,000 characters. With 3,000 of those, you could possibly read a newspaper in China today. If we stick to the biblical tale of the Tower of Babel, with God scattering humans across the earth to break their common language, it is in fact human mobility, civilizations coming together for trade or war that brought forward the invention of the alphabet. And it is often to the ancestors of the bankrupt traders of my country, Lebanon, that this invention is attributed, the Phoenicians. What they brought forth is a set of 22 letters that are the foundation of many of our languages today. The written word, however, would be of no value without the support on which it is applied. We have seen pictograms embedded in clay. We have seen them carved in rock. However, the most precious invention has been that of the Egyptian with the papyrus. With the leaves of a plant growing on the banks of the Nile, the Egyptians weaved the founding material of civilization, a cheap, sturdy, reliable material onto which Egyptians, Greeks, Romans inscribed all their knowledge. The Egyptians exported tons of that material throughout the ancient world. In effect, papyrus saw the proliferation of writing, of books and libraries. The idea of bound books did not exist yet. Papyrus enabled them to produce scrolls, and it would be on these scrolls, some measuring up to 30 meters, that knowledge would be inscribed. Now, to finally begin with viruses, let us now introduce war, the man-made cataclysm that has plagued humanity from its inception. The first history book to have survived on papyrus to this day, the first historical record written by the first historian in the history is the history of the Peloponnesian War by Thucydides in Greece. The book is a record of a war that took place between Athens and Sparta in the years 431-403 BC. In his introduction, Thucydides writes, "It may well be that my history will seem less easy to read because of the absence in it of a romantic element. It will be enough for me, however, if these words of mine are judged useful by those who want to understand clearly the events which happened in the past and which, human nature being what it is, will at some time or another and in much the same ways be repeated in the future." To read Thucydides' history is to read the blueprint of every civil war that has ever happened since. This book also gives us the first record of a plague that decimated the city of Athens in the course of this war. The potential culprit is a ship coming from Africa to deliver ivory. To read his account of the plague is to read our latest news feed about the coronavirus. A contemporary of Thucydides is the playwright Sophocles, who, in the midst of the pandemic, wrote Oedipus Rex. The plot goes thus. Oedipus is the king of Thebes, a city afflicted by a great plague, a manifestation of the anger of the gods at the unpunished murder of the previous king. Oedipus vows to uncover the truth. What is of interest to us is yet another manifestation that at the root of a natural catastrophe is the just punishment for human transgression. Poor Oedipus, however, uncovers that he had himself unknowingly slain his father and married his mother. He was the transgressor, the cause of the plague. His punishment was to blind himself and end his life as a beggar in the streets of Thebes. This is an image, a moral cautionary tale first performed in 429 BC, still performed to this very day. At this point, it is important to note that all manuscripts are copied by hand. In science, art, and philosophy, all the foundations of our knowledge were laid then and there on papyrus. Scribes and translators would patiently copy these scrolls of knowledge that would spread across geographies and time. All civilizations that passed in every single corner of the world produced cultures of their own, translated into images. In every field, from the religious to the political to the medical to the scientific, images were needed to formalize ideas, communicate and transmit. Images used as a bridge from the world of man to the infinite world of nature. In antiquity, people believed in a myriad of gods and built complex mythologies inspired by the natural world. Everything around them was divine, and man's role was to appease the gods, to deal with the gods, to worship the gods. These gods thought like humans and often morphed and mixed animal and human features. They were, just as nature is, extraordinary. They could perform wonders and were thoroughly intertwined in the destinies of people. They were present on earth, and most essentially, they manifested themselves in the heavens above, in the stars and planets. Men literally turned the natural world around them into tales of creation, subjugation, and worship. These mythologies made sense. They explained the world through complex constructs of images and words. To abandon these cosmologies of gods for a single creator, a single reason for existence, a single God, is undoubtedly a revolutionary idea. In the imagined web of past time, the father of the three monotheistic religions, Abraham, comes forth thousands of years ago in Mesopotamia. His father, interestingly, is a maker of images, an idol maker, an artist, a businessman. Abraham's first act of defiance is to smash all of his father's idols, except one. Later, God put Abraham's faith to test. He is to sacrifice Isaac, the only miraculous child he had with his old wife, Sarah. For years, the couple had been unable to beget children. Then God told Sarah she would have a child. Sarah smiled. We will call him Isaac, he who laughs in Hebrew. Abraham, nonetheless, took Isaac to the altar, and just as he was about to slay him, God stopped his hand and replaced the child with a lamb. Another cautionary tale from antiquity is the Hebraic story of the 10 plagues of Egypt. The pharaohs of Egypt had enslaved the Jews, the descendants of Abraham, and Moses, the current prophet in function, was to lead them away from captivity. Pharaoh, however, refused to release the Jews. God hence inflicted 10 plagues, 10 disasters onto Egypt as a sign of his power and his stature as the only true God. In the face of Yahweh, Osiris, Isis, Horus, Seth, Ptah, Re, Hathor, Tot, Bastet, Ammon, and so on, were all helpless. Meanwhile, other gods must have felt as helpless, for other mythologies were about to slip into oblivion. Pantheons of gods, temples, and rituals, all about to be forgotten. Another miraculous child comes into play, Jesus of Nazareth, another Son of God to be sacrificed. With the Jews who followed the teachings of Christ and new converts, Christianity spread across the ancient world. There was a radical modernity, a radical schism with the teachings of this mystical character whose ideas remain revolutionary to this day. In Christ, God had taken a human form, a human body that was to suffer to redeem us from our sins. We were no longer sacrificing to the gods. God was sacrificing his Son for us. After the Mesopotamians, the Greeks, the Egyptians, came the turn of the Roman Empire, afflicted by a deadly plague at the height of Roman power across the Mediterranean. The plague could have reached the empire through their trade routes and embassy in China. The Antonine plague struck in 165 AD. In its midst, the emperor sat down and wrote a book, the Meditations. Marcus Aurelius' thoughts are to this day a blueprint for Stoicism, a philosophy to cope with pain, illness, anxiety, and loss. Facing the pandemic, he wrote, "An infected mind is a far more dangerous pestilence than any plague. One only threatens your life, the other destroys your character." Another plague would hit the Roman Empire in 250. It would claim the lives of 2 emperors. Meanwhile, the Christian faith was spreading and Christians were persecuted. In the Colosseum in Rome, they would be fed to wild animals in order to test their faith. In 312, the new Roman Emperor, Constantine the Great, allowed Christians to practice their faith. He founded a new city, Constantinople, in 324, which remained for 1,000 years the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire. Constantine would be baptized on his deathbed in 337. In 380, Christianity would become the official religion of the Roman Empire. In 541, another plague hits the empire and its capital, Constantinople. The culprit is always trade and global mobility. In this case, ships coming from Egypt bringing grain to feed the empire. The most important legacy of the emperor of the time, Justinian, is a codex, a book of law and mosaics representing him in all his glory, pixelized images made of rocks and glass. Egypt, at this point, was already in decline and had slowed the production of papyrus. In dry weather, that material could last a very long time. Humidity would, however, damage it irretrievably. That material was now replaced by parchment made of the skins of animals. It was a laborious and expensive material to make. Papyrus scrolls had democratized knowledge across the ancient world, and now it gave way to books, bound pages of dead animal skin. Writing itself, since all books were copied by hand, was slower on parchment. Books were thus expensive to make and precious to have, luxury items. Across the empire, Egypt being one of its provinces, pagan rites were banned and temples closed. Egyptians continued speaking their language, but their ability to read hieroglyphs disappeared with their priests. In China, 2 centuries before the birth of Christ, a technological advancement was made that would change the course of humanity: paper. The process, how to make paper, would, however, remain a state secret for 600 years. At that time, the Chinese had made many spectacular scientific advancements. They had discovered gunpowder, and most essentially, they had already started printing. The first printing technique that would start the propagation of images in the world is the woodblock. A woodblock involves carving the negative of an image in a piece of wood, ink it, and then apply it on the surface onto which that image is to be fixed. With the woodblock begins the adventure of printing. However, if the Chinese were wary of sharing their secrets with the rest of the world, it is believed that the virus strains that caused the Justinian plague and precipitated the end of the Roman Empire came from China. Trade, mobility, and wars seem to be the pattern repeating itself. In 610, the Abrahamic God manifested himself again, this time in the desert of Arabia, to a last prophet in a long lineage of prophecies. In a cave next to Mecca, the angel Gabriel appeared to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and said to him, "Read." Upon which he replied, "I am unable to read." The angel thus commanded Muhammad to recite the following verses. "Read, in the name of your Lord who created man from clinging substances. Read, your Lord is most generous. He who taught by the pen taught man that which he knew not." Islam spread throughout the region with this incredible invocation to read. This ushered the age of Islamic conquest, a fruitful time during which the new religion assimilated the cultures of the various geographies invested. In Europe, however, reading was concentrated around the church and its dogma. After the death of the Prophet in 632, the verses of the Quran memorized by his followers would be compiled in a codex, the new invention of bound pages that had replaced the scrolls. In 1751, the Chinese Tang dynasty's army was stopped in a battle at the river Talas in Kyrgyzstan by the Abbasids, the third Islamic caliphate. Captured Chinese would transmit the secret of papermaking to the Arabs, and this is how it found its way from China to the Middle East and then to Europe. In the Islamic world, paper would usher an era of scientific revolution with ancient knowledge translated and madrasas proliferating. In 1350, the strain of the Justinian plague hit again. In Europe, it became known as the Black Death. It was a marking event for a period of Europe known as the Middle Ages. The church had grown powerful and could only read the disease as a punishment for sins against God. Knowledge was consolidated around the church and new beliefs deemed as heresy, sometimes punishable by death. Around 1400, with paper now being produced in Europe, new printing techniques started to appear. Woodblock, which existed in China since the 2nd century, started being used in Europe. Then, engraving, a process used by goldsmiths to decorate metalwork such as armors, was now used to print images onto paper. With engraving, artists had to cut the image onto the surface of a metal plate with a burin, a laborious and difficult exercise. Engraving led to intaglio and etching, wherein artists would use chemicals to help them carve into the metal the image to be printed. Then, in 1440, another goldsmith by the name of Johannes Gutenberg was going to lay the foundation of our modern world, the invention of the movable type printing press. When a woodblock was produced, you would have to carve out of the wood the entire text or image you were to reproduce. Gutenberg produced an alloy to cast individual letters with which you could form words, sentences, and print entire pages in a versatile and faster way. The invention, in fact, was not new. China was already using that very technique. But how could a movable type language based on thousands of characters compete with 22 letters? Movable type changed the world. Within a few years of its invention, millions of copies of books were already in production. For commercial concerns, the first book Gutenberg produced was a Bible. However, very soon, all these precious manuscripts of knowledge written on scrolls, copied onto parchment, compiled into codexes, would find their way onto paper, forever marked by Gutenberg's movable type. China, always ahead of its time, was now, however, using printing for another purpose altogether. They were already using paper money. In a world that had been dependent on coins, heavy gold, silver, and copper for so long, imagine the literal weight taken off your shoulders if you could carry your entire wealth on slips of paper. The Ming banknotes produced between 1375 and 1425 were based on the leap of faith that a simple piece of paper could carry the promise of a value it did not intrinsically have. At one point, too much paper had been printed, and that leap of faith was over, ending that first paper money experiment in 1425. How contemporary is that problem for us today? In Europe, a new era was about to begin. The Christians had been fighting the expansion of Islam that had reached France and conquered part of Spain and Portugal. In 1492, Spain managed to conquer Granada, the jewel of Islam's expansion. In the freed Muslim cities, they found books, the books of Greek philosophy, medicine, geography, and science the West had forgotten and the Arabs had laboriously copied. With the advent of the printing press, knowledge could now propagate. From the Arabs, the art of navigating by following the stars with astrolabes had been learned. Innovations in printing ushered a new era for anatomy, medicine, and a better understanding of the body. Innovations in ships, sails, and navigation set up the era of exploration. A man of this time, a navigator by the name of Christopher Columbus, approached the Spanish court. He claimed he could find a shorter way to get to India. Trade routes to India and China had existed for millennia now, but Columbus gambled that if one crossed the ocean, one would ultimately reach India. Thus was America mistakenly discovered. To America, Columbus took the plague. From America, Columbus brought back syphilis and gold, and the promise of more gold and an entire continent to conquer. Apart from viruses and the gold, the Columbian exchange would see the widespread transfer of plants, animals, culture, technology, and ideas. Entire populations would flock from the old world to the new world, many against their will, as slaves. Animals would also find themselves carried above these ships in captivity. Amongst the most precious gifts a monarch could receive at the time was a wild animal. The Spanish had crossed the ocean and discovered America. The Portuguese sailed south, going all the way around Africa to the Cape of Good Hope until they reached the Indian Ocean. The founder of the Portuguese Empire in India sent his king this rhinoceros as a gift. The king, in turn, sent the rhino as a gift to the Pope. The animal died in a shipwreck without getting to its destination. Albert Dürer, a printmaker from Germany, made around 5,000 copies of this print, a rhinoceros he had never seen, but carved nonetheless in a piece of wood. In 1632, the astronomer Galileo angered the Pope when he published a book in which he openly stated that the Earth was moving around the sun. He was accused of heresy by the Church and put on trial. With his telescope, he had made detailed observations of the moon and other planets. In 1665, the Great Plague hit London, and a young scientist went into quarantine. Turning the biblical tale of Adam and Eve and the apple on its head, an apocryphal story relates how it was while sitting under an apple tree with the fruit of knowledge falling from the tree onto his very head that Isaac Newton understood the universe was held together by an invisible force called gravity. Newton, who was a genius in calculus, believing, like the Greek philosopher Pythagoras 2,000 years ago, that all forces of nature can be measured, developed the universal law of gravity. Being in quarantine, Newton, who had immersed himself in all the translated books of knowledge in anatomy, philosophy, and mathematics, locked himself in his house. He turned one of his rooms into a camera obscura and theorized on the nature of light. In the history of images, nothing can challenge the simplicity and mystery of a camera obscura, a phenomenon already observed by Aristotle 300 years before the birth of Christ. A simple hole in the wall of a darkened room channels rays of light that would project the inverted image of what's on the outside. The camera obscura was an apparatus sometimes used by artists to produce images, to copy nature. Newton had observed how in rainbows light manifests itself into separate colors. With glass prisms, he set out to understand why this occurred. He pressed a needle against his eye, and when spots of colors appeared, he understood, like Leonardo before him, that the eye itself functioned like a camera obscura, and white light was made of all its other colors. Newton also invented a revolutionary telescope with a refracting mirror that is at the base of all optical tools, including all cameras invented later on. While Newton gazed into the stars with this new telescope, looking at the infinitely large, his arch nemesis, Robert Hooke, devised a microscope to look at the infinitely small. Optical experiments with microscopes were of the time. He released in 1665 his book, Mycographia, the Gutenberg Bible of biologists. The book owes its impact to its impressive illustrations. In 1675, Anton van Leeuwenhoek observed for the very first time bacteria. With a tiny microscope with a single glass lens, he was able to magnify up to 300 times, viewing for the very first time red blood cells, spermatozoa, and microorganisms. In 1704, Newton released his observations on light in his book, Optics. Besides calculus and astronomy, he was also invested in alchemy, a long discarded science for its mythical quests to create the philosopher's stone, a substance capable of turning base metals into gold. This discipline would, however, lead to modern chemistry. This period of history in Europe, with intellectuals using reason to question the world, is known as the Enlightenment. It produced radical politics, iconoclastic art, natural science, and led to the first industrial revolution, a shift from agrarian and handicraft economy to one dominated by industry and machines. This redefined our relation to nature, labor, and machines. The natural force that man domesticated for that change was steam. The next force that scientists were experimenting with and trying to understand and capture, an invisible force much more difficult to conceive of, to master and domesticate, electricity. Even though you sometimes hold him in your pocket and you often use him to make deals, what do you actually know about Benjamin Franklin? In 1752, Franklin was thoroughly interested in all the electrical experiments happening at that time. He set up an experiment of his own to prove that thunder was electricity. Here is us domesticating the forces of nature. Imagine thunder, once a feared god, reduced to a force collected into a glass jar. Thunder, once a revered god that would become in 2,000 years and 200 years, a force running through every electrical socket all over the world. There was undoubtedly the need and enough reason to pay homage to a man such as Isaac Newton. The task was taken by a revolutionary French architect in revolutionary times. Louis-Étienne Boullé is a paper architect, a derogatory term used for architects whose schemes never get built. His cenotaph for Newton, drawn in 1784, is one of these schemes. Boullé rejected the Vitruvian notion of architecture as the art of building. In order to execute, Boullé wrote, it is first necessary to conceive. It is the product of the mind, this process of creation, that constitutes architecture. Though never built, this is indeed one of architecture's most celebrated buildings. (1789), the French Revolution. Monarchy across Europe was granted through the church by divine right. There was this tacit understanding that a monarch needed to derive his legitimacy from God himself, hence from his representative on earth, the Pope. In France, that whole equation was about to lose its head. A French physician, Joseph Ignace Guillotin, invented the machine on which France would sentence its king and its queen to death. Thousands would follow. In a statement to the French Assembly in 1789, Guillotin said, "My machine will take off a head in a twinkling, and the victim will feel nothing but a refreshing coolness. We cannot make too much haste gentlemen to allow the nation to enjoy this advantage. Here is the King of France, Louis XVI. Here is his head. Here is the Queen of France, Marie Antoinette. And here is a drawing made by Jacques-Louis David of the Queen being taken to the scaffold. The guillotine is a testament of the relation these times had developed with machines. The revolution was fueled by the printing of revolutionary books, pamphlets, and newspapers, finding echoes in France and all across the world. In Germany, in 1796, a playwright by the name of Alois Senfelder went broke and had no money to print the new play he had just written. He experimented with a novel technique of etching on stone using a greasy acid-resistant ink. The technique he discovered was lithography. Imagine a high-quality photocopy machine operated by hand, nonetheless. This technique is still used to this day to produce high-quality prints. In the year 1800, Alessandro Volta succeeded in making the world's first battery, a device that could store electric current. In 1814, Goya paints the 3rd of May, 1808. In 1817, a first cholera pandemic spread through the world, starting from India. It would claim the life a few years later of a British poet named Lord Byron. In 1818, Byron challenged a friend of his, Mary Shelley, to write horror stories. Mary wrote Frankenstein. In 1803, a man named George Foster was hanged for murder in London. After his execution, his body was carried to the Royal College of Surgeons to be publicly dissected. There, an Italian natural philosopher by the name of Giovanni Aldini wanted to demonstrate the nature of animal electricity by applying electrical current to the corpse. The Time newspaper reported, on the first application of the process to the face, the jaw of the deceased criminal began to quiver, the adjoining muscles were horribly contorted, and one eye was actually opened. In the subsequent part of the process, the right hand was raised and clenched, and the legs and thighs were set in motion. For the onlookers, it looked as if electricity had the power to bring the dead man back to life. This is the experiment that inspired Mary Shelley to write her book. Frankenstein is a cautionary tale about creation. Mary Shelley called it a modern Prometheus. In Greek mythology, Prometheus is a titan, the god of fire. He is the creator of humanity that he created out of clay and defied the other gods by stealing fire and giving it to humanity as civilization. He is sometimes presented as the father of Deucalion, the hero of the flood story that also found its way into Greek mythology. Frankenstein is the story of a scientist who makes a creature out of pieces of human cadavers. The dream of man has always been to make something or someone do the work in his stead. The monster, however, rebels against his creator. The story unfolds as both creator and creation vow to kill each other. In 1827, by placing a plate coated with light-sensitive bitumen of Judea inside the Camera Obscura, the French scientist Nicéphore Niepce captured the view from his window. This is the earliest photograph ever made, photography, which literally means writing with light. In 1829, William Burt, an American inventor, patented the first typewriter, which he called a typographer. In 1836, Samuel Morse used that electric current and created the single-wire telegraph. The machine worked by transmitting electrical signals over a wire laid between stations. In addition, he created the Morse code that assigned a set of dots and dashes to each English letter, allowing for the simple transmission of complex messages across these lines. The innovation is the base of our telephones, fax machines, and the internet. In 1839, the daguerreotype becomes the first publicly available photographic process, widely used during the 1840s and 50s. It was created by this man, Louis Daguerre. In 1841, George Rand invents paint in tubes. In 1845, Gustave Courbet paints a selfie, the desperate man, at his time of great upheaval and change. In 1848, Karl Marx publishes the Communist Manifesto. That same year, another revolution in France deposed the monarchy. In 1854, the father of virology, Louis Pasteur, is quoted for having said, "In the field of observation, chance favors only the prepared mind." In 1855, a third plague pandemic originating in Yunnan, China, spreads. Its center is an area of mines, alimenting the explosive demand for minerals, primarily copper. In 1859, Charles Darwin, a British naturalist, published On the Origins of Species, his theory of evolution. In it, he states that evolution happens by natural selection. Species evolved according to their natural environments. In 1862, Ernst Haeckel, a marine biologist and an ardent promoter of Darwinism, publishes his work about the radiolarians, 500 million year old skeletonized single-cell organisms that he observed with his microscope. The radiolarian drawings of Haeckel unfold like an alphabet of possibilities, nature's very library of engineering, architecture, and design. In 1866, the first functioning telegraphic cable between Britain and the United States is put in place. A cable of 3,200 kilometers across the Atlantic Ocean, relaying instantaneous messages from London to New York. This cable launches a great surge in undersea technology. To understand the geography and the geology of the ocean depth became a practical necessity. With that first message linking instantaneously the old world with the new, comes the hope of a new era, a time where no misunderstandings between humans could lead to pointless wars. With 2 world wars to come, we see today how naively hopeful that thought was. In 1867, Alfred Nobel, a chemist and engineer, patents dynamite, the explosive device that could tear down mountains in the blink of an eye. In a hopeful spree, Nobel said, "My dynamite will sooner lead to peace than 1,000 world conventions. As soon as men will find that in one instant whole armies can be utterly destroyed, they surely will abide by golden peace. With dynamite, mines could be dug deeper and more quickly, and uneconomical deposits thus became profitable. The extracted tonnage of copper, coal, and iron ore increased 100-fold. This, in turn, speeded up the making of roads and railways. An equally explosive device is philosophy. Friedrich Nietzsche's writings would find little echo in his lifetime. He would die in 1900, little known, little read, and his ideas would mistakenly be associated with the rise of the Third Reich. Before his death, in a book published posthumously, he wrote, "I know my fate. One day my name will be associated with the memory of something tremendous, a crisis without equal on earth, the most profound collision of conscience, a decision that was conjured up against everything that had been believed, demanded, hallowed so far. I am no man. I am dynamite." In 1870, humanity embarked on the second industrial revolution that would lead to cars, planes, electricity, cinema, music, telephones. Until the 19th century, we only knew of one way to make light, to burn things. Now, everything was going to change. 1877. Thomas Edison invents the phonograph, the first device that could record sound and play it back. He commissions his team to follow on with the invention of a motion camera and a viewer. He had now entered the era of sound and image. In Europe, these inventions would then be improved by the Lumière brothers. In 1880, Edison again lights a neighborhood in New York City. New York never slept since, neither did the world. In 1889, the Russian flu spread throughout the world, facilitated by modern transport, the more than 200,000 kilometers of railways connecting Europe and transatlantic travel. In 1890, electricity was used for the first time in the execution of William Kemmler in the United States. In 1895, Guillermo Marconi demonstrated the first viable use of electromagnetic waves to transmit information without wires. In 1895, Wilhelm Conrad Röntgen, realizing that certain electromagnetic radiations were blackening light-sensitive papers, discovered the X-ray, producing the first index of a hand using these radiations, the hand of his wife. The age of discovery, this raging modernity, fueled the imaginary of writers, creating the new genre of science fiction. In 1898, H.G. Wells released The War of the Worlds. In this book, Earth is subjected to an invasion of Martians. Wells said that the plot arose from a discussion with his brother Frank about the catastrophic effect of the British on indigenous Tasmanians. What would happen, he wondered, if Martians did to Britain what the British had done to the Tasmanians? In the book, our technology paled in comparison to the Martians. Human armies were decimated, cities conquered. What saved humanity were germs. These germs of, here I'm quoting the book. These germs of disease have taken toll of humanity since the beginning of things, taken toll of our pre-human ancestors since life began here. But by virtue of this natural selection of our kind, we have developed resisting power. To no germ do we succumb without a struggle. And to many, those that cause putrefaction in dead matter, for instance, our living frames are altogether immune. But there are no bacteria in Mars, and directly these invaders arrived. Directly they drank and fed. Our microscopic allies began to work their overthrow. With the invention of cinema by the Lumiere brothers and Edison, the films shot were mostly vaudeville, documentaries, experiments stuck in the novelty of the medium, presupposing that, as all novelties, it would phase out. It would take an actual magician to understand the creative potential of film. In 1902, Georges Méliès released his Voyage to the Moon, a film featuring cinema's very first special effects. What about artists? What were artists thinking at the beginning of the 20th century? One of the most frightening cultural documents I have read is the Futurist Manifesto, published in 1909 by the Italian poet Filippo Tommaso Marinetti. Here are 3 excerpts. We declare that the splendor of the world has been enriched by a new beauty, the beauty of speed. A racing automobile with its bonnet adorned with great tubes like serpents with explosive breath. A roaring motor car which seems to run on machine gun fire is more beautiful than the victory of Samothrace. We want to glorify war, the only cure for the world. Militarism, patriotism, the destructive gesture of the anarchists, the beautiful ideas which kill, and contempt for women. We want to demolish museums and libraries, fight morality, feminism, and all opportunist and utilitarian cowardice. We will sing of the great crowds agitated by work, pleasure, and revolt, the multicolored and polyphonic surf of revolutions in modern capitals, the nocturnal vibrations of the arsenals and the workshops beneath their violent electric moons, the gluttonous railway station devouring smoking serpents, factories suspended from the clouds by threads of their smoke, bridges with their leap of gymnasts flung across the diabolic cutlery of sunny rivers, adventurous steamers sniffling the horizon, giant-breasted locomotives puffing on the rails like enormous steel horses with long tubes for bridle, and the gliding flight of airplanes whose propeller sounds like the flapping of a flag and the applause of enthusiastic crowds. In this manifesto, Marinetti is expressing his rejection of the past through his celebration of speed, machinery, violence, youth, and industry. 1914 marks the beginning of World War I, forever discrediting the idea that science could make man a better man. Nothing prepared humanity for the industrialization of death in World War I. In the course of this war, the newly conceived and built instruments of modernity were used to kill. How can one understand the enthusiasm of all the youth that threw itself in this war? The answer lies perhaps in Marinetti's manifesto. Most young men at the time, from rural backgrounds or even from cities, hadn't had access to these new tools of modernity yet. What the war provided was a first encounter with planes, cars, and radios. The war was thrilling because it was a modern war. The collision of flesh and machines would be brutal. 20 million people were killed in that war. 20 million more were wounded. For the wounded, those who lost an arm, a leg, or a face. Science came up with prosthetics, the ultimate merger of machine and man. The further calamity of World War I came, however, towards its very end in 1918 with the Spanish flu, an influenza pandemic caused by H1N1 virus. It infected 500 million people, and the death toll is estimated between 20 to 50 million people. The virus is said to have arrived to Europe from America just as its troops entered the war. In 1917, the Bolsheviks took power in Russia, starting an experiment with communism that would end in 1991. In 1929, the Russian filmmaker Dziga Vertov released Man with a Movie Camera. The film follows life in a city in the Soviet Union throughout a day, from morning to night. The film is an hymn to modernity in a communist society. Lenin had begun a vast campaign of modernization in Russia, involving large industries and electrification. The art of propaganda was here to celebrate this effort. Man and machine working together to build a better future. Dziga Vertov said, "I am the camera's eye. I am the machine which shows the world as I alone see it. Starting from today, I am forever free of human immobility. I approach and draw away of things. I crawl under them. I climb on them. I am on the head of a galloping horse. I burst at full speed into a crowd. I run before running soldiers. I throw myself down on my back. I rise up with the airplanes. I fall and I fly at once, with the bodies falling or rising through the air." In 1929, the stock market crashed in New York City, generating the Great Depression in the US and a recession for the rest of the world. Charlie Chaplin, who had become the global hero of the silver screen with his tramp character, released Modern Times in 1936. A poignant commentary about the hardships of the working class, still raising crucial questions about how we work and why. The first telephone had been introduced in 1875. Televisions were introduced in 1829, but the most spread mode of communication in 1813 was still the radio. We are at the eve of World War II, and Orson Welles performed a radio adaptation of H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds, simulating in real time, on air, a Martian invasion in America. The episode caused a panic amongst its listening audience, some mistaking it for reality. 1939 marks the beginning of World War II. In 1935, an art critic by the name of Walter Benjamin published an essay titled "The Work of Art in the Age of its Mechanical Reproduction." The production of images by then, through printing, photography, cinema, had grown exponentially. For Benjamin, mechanical reproduction not only changed how art was viewed or distributed, but what art was, the political significance of images in the age of mass production. Benjamin says, "Our taverns and our metropolitan streets, our offices and furnished rooms, our railroad stations and our factories appeared to have us locked up hopelessly. Then came the film and burst this prison world asunder by the dynamite of the 10th of a second, so that now, in the midst of its fire-clung ruins and debris, we calmly and adventurously go traveling. With the close-ups, space expands, with slow motion, movement is extended." In 1940, the year of his suicide while fleeing the war and Nazi Germany, Walter Benjamin wrote a series of aphorisms under the title Thesis on the Philosophy of History. A few years earlier, he had encountered this drawing by Paul Klee. In the apocalyptic climate of World War II, Benjamin writes, a Klee painting named Angelus Novus shows an angel looking as though he is about to move away from something he is fixedly contemplating. His eyes are staring, his mouth is open, his wings are spread. This is how one pictures the angel of history. His face is turned towards the past, where he perceives a chain of events. He sees only one single catastrophe, which keeps piling wreckage and hurls it in front of his feet. The angel would like to stay, awaken the dead, and make whole what has been smashed. But a storm is blowing from paradise. It has caught it in his wings with such a violence that the angel can no longer close them. The storm irresistibly propels him into the future to which his back is turned, while the pile of debris before him grows skyward. This storm is what we call progress. At this point, I have to apologize. This time, not because I haven't mentioned images enough, but women. Where are women in the thousands of years of innovation I have just listed? In truth, they are everywhere, and I am thoroughly guilty of having mentioned so few. It is believed that in prehistory, women learned the delicate science of growing seeds and of weaving. They feed us, they clothe us, and we hunt. The only woman I mentioned was Mary Shelley, the author of Frankenstein. Mary had been encouraged to write by the poet Lord Byron. He was an eccentric Englishman, a poet, adventurer, and his only marriage resulted with the birth of a girl, Augusta Ada King. Her mother raised her alone, far from the influence and madness of Lord Byron. As a remedy to her poetic inclinations, her mother brought her up with mathematics. As a teenager, she started working with a mathematician by the name of Charles Babbage. In the 1800s, there was the need for calculators, machines that could crunch the numbers, now growing exponentially in the fields of finance, engineering, and war. Babbage, known as the father of computers, theorized an analytical machine, an engine that could perform the most complex calculations. Ada would be the first to publish his work and to see that the potential of such an engine went far beyond quantities and calculations. A machine such as this could perform any task that it is programmed to do. Ada is credited to have written the first program for this machine, becoming thus the first computer programmer in history. She passed away in 1852 at the age of 36. It would literally take 100 years for that machine to ultimately be built, and for a single purpose. In the midst of World War II, on the 9th of April 1943, the US War Department decided to fund the building of such a machine. They needed to gain time in the elaborate calculations determining the trajectory of shells, and that is what that machine was to do. What made it possible was to switch from all the cumbersome mechanical devices to electrical components. That first computer filled a room measuring 15 by 9 meters. It was also used to perform the calculations for a weapon that haunts the imaginary of humanity since its inception and use in 1944, the atomic bomb. After World War II came the Cold War, opposing the Soviets to America. That war was never fought directly. It was a series of proxy wars in which all weapons, all strategies, even art, were used. The Soviets had developed an art style known as socialist realism, an art form through which the Soviets were to promote their failed communist utopia. The American CIA would fund exhibitions by a series of artists known as the abstract expressionists in America, aiming to demonstrate the extent and the freedom in America. Beginning in the 1950s, the third industrial revolution began with semiconductors, mainframe computing, personal computing, and the internet, the beginning of the digital revolution. Today, we are dealing with the heritage of three industrial revolutions and are caught in the web of the fourth. The only question that matters is one of survival. In this brutal negotiation between men, machines, and nature, viruses come to remind us of our intrinsic link, our dependence on the natural world. Of all our relations to nature, perhaps the most broken is our relation to the stars. We have lit up the world with artificial light, turning our lives into endless days, and have hence shrouded the mysteries of the skies. The stars no longer guide us or amaze us. They are no longer present in our everyday lives, and even though we all carry zodiac signs, we forget where this knowledge comes from. But think back to the thousands of years during which men at night were constantly facing that amazing tapestries of stars, seeking guidance, casting prayers, and projecting images. Into the stars, we projected images, cosmologies of animals, deities, and supernatural beings. They still look after us to this day. Then, into the stars, we projected a dog, then a monkey, then men, and finally, an image, a record containing all the knowledge of man, a trace of our existence, a bottle thrown in 1977 in the vast sea of the universe. If the history of civilization begins with a catastrophic account of the flood, right now feels just like that beginning, a moment of apprehension for a cataclysmic event that would stop us in a race we cannot win. Our domination over nature has superseded anything we as a species have ever achieved. Yet, all our artifices, our cultures, our science are based and derived from that natural world. This is what the virus reminds us of, that we are nature and need a sustainable relation to nature. Now we need to reflect. Stanley Kubrick is quoted for having said that observation was a dying art. In the fast pace of our contemporary lives, we need to take the time to observe. First, thus, we will observe. Then, we will make an image, a single image, a vital image, a viral image. The good news is that the lecture just ended.
Mr. Alfred, can you hear me?
Yeah.
My name is Saeed Al-Ka'bi. I was really fascinated with the whole lecture. The question that is popping in my mind is how do you think of let's say for this lecture, for example, how did you think of getting all these pictures and narrating that whole story that you told us? How does that process go from start to end?
Well, any professional, like right now, you're going to a university and you're studying a discipline. So every discipline has a history. So if I'm studying medicine today, or law, or accounting, or dentistry, or even if I'm a trash man, right? There are people who've been doing that for thousands of years. So I am an artist. I care about images, and so I care about the history of images. And what this lecture is meant to reflect upon is that we cannot be or do anything without having a solid relation to the past. And so this is where this comes from.
So, but like, correct me if I'm wrong, can we say that it's kind of like a mix from, as you said, your knowledge from what happened in the past and like kind of your experience in the whole field as well? Can
No, my experience I will give to you tomorrow. So tomorrow is going to be a lecture about more about how I work. None of the images I have shown you today is my work. So
yeah.
not a single one of these. And these images, they are here to think. So it's literally just this lecture is me thinking out loud and talking with you. So that's.
Thank you very much.
Right. Sorry, Kamal wants to say something. To Saeed.
Saeed, just to also add a little element to what Alfred was saying, I think if you dissect also the lecture, you have certain commonalities that do come back. So you have the notion of the virus, you have the notion of the image, and you have the notion of innovation. And this is where you have 4 different categories that he will try to cross and intersect with each other and try to create a relationship with. It's not necessarily linear every time, but it's about having these 4 categories and trying to see how they all play with each other. Sometimes, the virus will provoke innovation, provoking catastrophe. Sometimes technology will provoke the virus and vice versa. And I think it's also this type of dance that history is all about.
There is a very important theory that I'm tackling, but not directly, but that we will be discussing more. It's it's called technological determinism, which basically means that every technology brings forth a change that is embedded in its very substance, its very medium. Said, بس سؤال, انت what do you study? What do you do?
My major is mechanical engineering.
Amazing. So mechanical engineering. Yeah. I mean, basically, mechanical engineers, before you could not be a mechanical engineer and not know how to draw, because you didn't have computers, you didn't have. So if you wanted to translate your ideas, you had to draw them. So all the drawings of scientists that I've shown are drawings made by these scientists, and they're scientists, they're not artists. So, and essentially this juxtaposition of art and engineering derives its strength from nature. So all the early artists and engineers, they learned everything from observation, from looking at nature, and from controlling the natural forces. So don't think at any point that this is not for you. This is for you. And yeah. So you guys are going to go to the Louvre. And you're going to see the collection, and there are museum people from the museum who are going to guide you through it. And what I want you to do in that workshop, the way we are going to start working, the way you are going to start working, is to collect images. And here I am looking for your very subjectivity. So if you care about cars, right? I want you to find a car in the Louvre, Abu Dhabi. And if you are going to come back and tell me, there is no car in the Louvre, Abu Dhabi, I will tell you that you are perhaps wrong. And maybe there is not a car, but there is a mechanical device of high importance. So whatever you care for, because this course is about you, this course is for you, this course is you working. So what are you going to work? So what I want to instill is a process, and the first step in this process is for you to collect everything you love. So whatever it is that you love, whatever it is that you are interested in, I want you to come forth and show me images. And I would like to discuss with each and every one of you why this choice was made. And I guess technically the way we're going to work this around, I'm going to ask every one of you to start a Pinterest account for the course. And I want to see and follow the development of each one of you on your Pinterest boards to kind of see what each one of you is thinking. If any one of you also uses that thing very well, let them talk to me privately. So the final presentation is a single image for each one of you. And that single image, we are working with the university so that it will be eventually printed on a 2 meter by 2 meter platform support and hung around the university. So somewhere, I guess you would want to be proud of that one image. Now, of course, making images today is so easy. How can what is going to be that image? And the point of the course is step 1, for you to think about images. Thinking about images means collecting. So I want each one of you to start collecting, and I want to see the individual collection of each and every one of you. So in your visit to the Louvre, each one of you is going to come back with something that spoke to him that did not perhaps speak to others. So I am really looking for your subjectivity. It's not like everybody's going to come back with the same result. When you visit the Louvre, you are in the same way that we went through in the lecture. You are going chronologically and across geographies, learning everything you possibly can about humanity. So I do hope that something there is going to be of interest to you. And I am here to stimulate your interest, to talk about your interest, and to foster that interest for you to produce an image. We will briefly look at Photoshop. Yes. But if one of you comes to me and tells me, I don't want to use Photoshop, I just want to draw, that's okay with me. Of course, she will have to digitize, to scan or take photos, and because the only way I can interact with the work you're going to be doing is through your Pinterest board. So the first thing you're going to do is to start collecting images, and I will send you later on a list of websites to look at, because there are amazing resources. I mean, if you can also do the work, it would be amazing. There are incredible websites where you can find incredible images. I mean, there's yeah, there's so much available on the net. It's a resource that we are lucky to have. Okay. The Louvre is a gift because it's one of the institutions that are in the UAE today. So it's a gift. It's really a gift and one to be thankful for. But beyond that, you have libraries and you have the internet, which is, I repeat, an incredible resource of images. An incredible resource of images. Of course, about the internet, you have to be wary because I can type a word that I want to look, and then I can reach Getty Images. And I mean, what I want to say is that be wary. I mean, search engines can often, like, you have to know how to navigate through them so to get a more varied result. But at the beginning, your mission starts here and now. Each and every one of you has to start collecting images. And when you collect these images, put them in folders. I want to see each and every one of you with a Pinterest account. I want to see you build your vocabulary. Images are an alphabet of possibilities and of choices. So what you have to do now is start making these choices. And this requires from you active engagement. So you go to books, you scan, you go to online, you bring back as much as you can. And from there, we will take it.